Today we're going to touch on electronic signatures called e-signing. Hi everyone, my name's Tom Reilly and I'm going to spend a couple minutes telling you about the evolution of how you sign a contract. Originally, for a contract to be binding, it had to be signed in wet ink, so-called because the ink that came out of the fountain pen or off the quill that was being used to sign the contract had to be blotted dry before it was able to be moved, and secondly, had to be sealed with wax and imprinted with a stamp. The concepts of seal fell prey a long time ago to not being used, but until very, very recently, wet ink signatures were the way that by and large we did business. That all started to change a few years ago, and as with so many things, the pandemic and epidemic caused by the COVID led businesses to rethink how they can get contracts signed without actually having people in a room signing with wet ink signatures. Electronic signatures, e-signatures, perhaps the most common known company that does this is DocuSign, have come into significant prevalence in the last 2 years. Over 66% of the companies now using e-signature did not do it 2 years ago. So what we're going to talk about today is not the process of contracting for a software license, whether it be DocuSign or one of its many competitors. The product is actually excellent. As always happens, the problem is that people either don't know how to use it or intentionally misusing it. The DocuSign program, and its competitors as well, is a robust program that allows you to do so many things electronically. Send drafts of agreements, redline agreements, make changes to agreements, a variety of things. Nobody uses any of those features. Nobody e-negotiates a contract. People e-sign agreements. One of the things you need to be aware of is that under federal law and in all 50 states, signing something electronically is as fully binding as if you signed it with a pen, wet ink signature. The first problem with the DocuSign or electronic signing process is most people don't realize that. Very often, I'll learn about a contract that one of my clients entered into 6 months or a year and a half after it's signed, when suddenly they say, "Hey, Tom, we don't want to be in this contract anymore." And I say, "Guys, you signed a 5-year deal." And they'll say, "No, we didn't." And I'll go to the person who signed the contract. I'll say, "Did you sign this agreement?" "No." "Well, isn't that your signature on the DocuSign line?" "Oh, yeah, I clicked something, but I never signed anything. I don't have authority to sign contracts. I just accepted the fact that I understood what the thing said." I said, "Well, basically, you signed the contract and you bound this company to a 5-year contract at $300,000 a year. And there's not a lot we can do about it." So the first thing is you got to make sure that you have a policy for who can sign contracts. And make sure you enforce that as stringently within your company or your business as you do with employees signing wet ink versions of contracts. Because in a very short period of time, we're not going to be doing wet ink signatures anymore. Everything's going to be electronic. The second problem is, and I think it's part of the name DocuSign, the people wanting you to sign the contract, you can't blame the lawyers for this one. They're not the lawyers. Lawyers want to negotiate contracts. Business people want you to sign contracts. So the second thing you need to do to make sure your company has a good electronic signature policy is to make sure you have very stringent rules in place as to who needs to review a contract, who needs to negotiate a contract, who needs to approve a contract before the actual signer signs the agreement. All those steps can be done through DocuSign or the other electronic software packages, or they can be done the old-fashioned way of, at least old-fashioned by our standards, sending documents back and forth by email until you get the document in final form. The next piece is, and this one's important, if you've negotiated the document, make sure the correct document gets loaded into the DocuSign program, or that the document you receive from the other side is in fact the contract you negotiated. It's happened more times than I care to count where we've negotiated a contract only to find that when it was sent for signature, it reverted back to the very first draft, the one the other side sent originally through DocuSign that we said we wouldn't sign until we made changes and negotiated it. Essentially, electronic signatures are the high-tech equivalent of the 1960s, 1970s stereotypical salesperson who would take you out to a 3-martini lunch, and as you're finishing your third drink, reach into his pocket of his loud sport coat and say, "Here, sign on the dotted line. I just happen to have a contract that sets forth everything we talked about today at lunch." And when you got back to the office and sobered up, you realized you signed something that A, wasn't what you talked about, B, wasn't what you wanted, and now you got to explain to your boss why you've committed the company to a contract that wasn't properly negotiated. It's the same in the electronic signature world, except you don't get the martinis anymore. Your agreement comes through, and unless you're paying attention, you're going to sign things that you shouldn't be signing, that haven't gone through your process, and it ultimately will end up binding your company to something that it doesn't want to be bound to, and that you may not be authorized to bind it to. Now, that doesn't impact the validity of the contract. As to the other side, if you had apparent authority, it looked to them like you had the authority to sign the contract, that's enough to make it a valid agreement. Your boss and your boss's boss might not think the same. So across the board, it is imperative that companies develop a strong, consistently applied electronic signing process that includes negotiation, revision, approval, before it gets to the person that actually signs the agreement. Much like everything else that happened during the speed up of technology in business over the last years as COVID impacted our lives, most companies adopted e-signing without thinking through any of these things. I realized that for a 2-year period, it left businesses continue to be able to operate, to get things done that otherwise would not have been done or could have taken weeks to get done rather than hours or days. Now's the time to go back and say, we've got the software. We don't really know quite how it works. We're going to do 2 things. Number 1, we're going to learn everything the software can do. Number 2, we're going to figure out what we need to make a part of our company's e-signing policy to make it work for us. And number 3, we're going to tell anybody that sends us a document for e-signature, hey, we're willing to sign the document electronically, but only if you follow our policy. The question is, will they? The answer is simple. Of course, because what they want you to do in the end is to sign the agreement. So have the policy, enforce the policy, review the policy from time to time, and electronic signing will make your business life simpler, easier to manage, and easier to know what's out there in the world that you've committed to. Another important step I want to touch on before we say goodbye is once you sign the document, don't forget about it. If someone asks you, where's that agreement you signed 3 months ago, Tom, and you're going back in your email looking for it, you're not doing it right. The last thing your company needs is an e-signature retention policy. Once the agreement is fully signed, who does it go to? Who stores it where? Who tracks how long we've committed to? Who tracks the other relevant business terms? Because a DocuSign sitting in your DocuSign folder or a DocuSign sitting in your email doesn't do any of that. You need to make sure you know what you're committing to electronically as fully, as completely as you do when you sign a document using the old wet ink signature. A whole lot about electronic signing in a very short period of time. And once again, I thank you for your time this time. Until we do it again next time.